More than 20 million people use Grammarly every day to improve their writing.
There are all kinds of music. Now we know that there's this kind of music too.
Of course, this is very different to our tastes, but it was quite nice to hear a traditional song.
I think we did more than we expected in the end. I don't know how much will that kind of, what kind of trace will that leave here, but it's a big step for, it's a small step for life, but the big step for humanity.
We'll go in springtime. We'll go in winter too. We'll go in our dreams. We'll go at any time. We'll go for a lifetime. We'll continue going through generations. Without victory. We'll go in springtime. We'll go in winter too. We'll go in our dreams. We'll go at any time. We'll go for a lifetime. We'll continue going through generations. To mount a picture. Of my heart. We'll go. We'll go. The mountain picture. We'll go. We'll go. The mountain picture that calls us. We never fall, as big as the sky, as far as the law. With no time in between. Breathing as one, living in faith, undying in flame. We love, our mission is blessed. We fight for you, for freedom unforeseen.
Okay, hi everyone. So there you see Laibach, the Slovenian art rock band from Slovenia, performing in North Korea, I think in 2015. They were the first Western new wave rock band, new wave band, to any kind of Western band to perform in North Korea. And why the North Koreans chose Laibach, I really don't know. They sang, of course, We Will Go to Mount Pektu in English, a famous North Korean song. Laibach, by the way, of course, is the German name for the capital of Slovenia, Ljubljana. You know, Slovenia is part of the European Union and is also part of the Eurozone. And Laibach was a band that began in the 1980s before the disintegration of Yugoslavia as part of the social movements in Yugoslavia among the youth, particularly in places like Slovenia, challenging the communist education system, the communist dogma that was taught in schools, and rebelling through, including new art movements, including music movements. And they're very popular in Germany. Laibach is very, very popular in Germany. They sing in German, they sing in English. There's lots of material on them that's available in on YouTube. And I don't know if any other Western music rock bands have been allowed to perform in North Korea since then. If you're interested in them, I know they're, like I said, they're very popular in Germany. Maybe Marie has heard of them in Belgium because they're very popular in Western Europe. So, okay, that's the introduction to today's class. I wanted to also remind you to sign up for a conference session so that next week I will meet with you individually to talk about your first drafts of your final exam paper. And I think we have to make up a class that I missed on Monday because I was traveling. So we will also meet online next Monday, as well as have conference sessions with you individually next week. But we're not going to have the Friday class, 2-hour class on Friday, because we don't need to. I mean, the individual conference sessions counts for that. And so, but we will meet next Monday online. But please sign up on the Google Drive file that I uploaded yesterday for the conference sessions, and you know, same format as with the midterm. Okay, and so let me before I forget, because I just somebody just reminded me, we need to do the also the attendance for the class. So let me go back to the smart attendance and get that finished. And let me go to Smart Cyber Campus and go log in and talk about policymaking in the European Union and attendance. And so here we are in week 14. And so smart attendance, and your number is 316. 316 is your number. And so let me 316, put that in the chat box, 316. So you can go ahead and sign up for that. And all right, so and this week we're talking again, we're at the last 2 chapters of the book. And I want to repeat a point I made when we met when I was in that hotel room in New Orleans, about how you're reading now the last chapter of the book. And let me see if I can go back to the notes there for the class, and because I have a lot of different files open up here, and so let me go stop share, and so screen share, and here are the notes, and let me close. I didn't want to close that. Let me open that up again. Okay, so here are the notes. It's not really, just a second. I want to get the right notes open here. And so, okay, there you see, and it focuses on the transatlantic relationship in the world, EU and the world. What is the relationship of the European Union, United States? Yeah, this relationship of the European Union, United States is really, really important. It's really, really important. I think more so than even Jonathan Olson understands as writing the textbook, because the United States you can make the argument the United States is a problem. The United States is increasingly a problem in international affairs. Rather than view the United States as this benign great power that saved the world from totalitarianism and is consequently rightfully hegemonic in global affairs, you can make the point instead that the Cold War was a conflict based upon mutual misperception of threat. And the Americans might think that they won the Cold War, but really they were just fortunate to escape from it. And they escaped from it because of Soviet leadership under Mikhail Gorbachev, who perceived the Cold War, in my view, correctly, but again, my view is not the dominant view, that the Cold War is basically based upon mutual misperception of threat, that both Moscow saw the United States as aggressive and imperialist, and the United States saw the Soviet Union as aggressive and imperialist, and that the Soviet Union needed to expand, and the United States prevented the Soviet Union from expanding, and because the Soviet Union couldn't expand, that the Soviet Union, therefore, internal contradictions caused it to disintegrate. And this is all very relevant to the present because, again, we see this escalating conflict between US and Beijing, between Washington and Beijing, the United States and China, all of these supposed lessons, even if they're incorrect, even if they're wrong, are being taken from the Cold War that ended 30 years ago and applied to China. That, well, it worked in dealing with the Soviet Union. Communist Soviet Union was contained and democratized. So we needed to contain China because China is innately aggressive, because China is also communist. And China cannot survive in a world in which it is at peace with the rest of the world, because the rest of the world is dominated by a democratic country, the United States, and that will always be a threat to China. So China needs to expand and spread its authoritarian system, or else the authority system in China will be under increasing strain and will inevitably collapse. So the Communist Party in the Soviet Union the Communist Party in China must expand. It's inherently imperialist. And so we have to deal with this challenge, this threat. And the United States is going to use its allies together with the European Union and Japan as the American allies to meet this challenge. And again, this is so much shaped by the experience of dealing with the Soviet Union, and even before, the experience of dealing with Nazi Germany, that you cannot appease an imperialist power. If China is naturally imperialist and expansionist, it must be stopped. You can't ignore it. We cannot ignore it, because if you allow China to expand, it would just become more imperialist and aggressive. And that was the supposed lesson learned from dealing with Nazi Germany under Hitler, that Britain and France acquiesced to Germany's demands to annex portions of neighboring countries that they claim belong to Germany because German populations lived there. And of course, the Germans under Hitler talked in terms of human rights. They talked about the rights of the German people living in neighboring Czechoslovakia to be free from domination and oppression by those nasty Czechs and Slovaks, and that they were fighting for human rights, and that they were only wanted the unification of the German people in one state so all Germans could live free and not be dominated by Czechs and Poles and others, and so on. Germany under Hitler talked in defensive terms, but they lied. So of course, everyone talks in terms of human rights, whether it be the Soviet Union, whether it be China under the Communist Party, the United States, everybody claims that their foreign policy aims to promote human rights. So this experience of appeasement with Germany and the supposed lessons learned in successfully containing, not appeasing, but containing the Soviet Union are now being drawn from and used, rightly or wrongly, in terms of American and European and Japanese policy towards China. And so I have a couple of short video clips from YouTube that highlight this appeasement lesson regarding the Soviet Union, regarding Germany, that supposedly were mistakes that the world must not repeat again today. So, you know, here's a couple. Here's one. Let me see if I can get this.
In return for Hitler's guarantee of world peace, Chamberlain and Delage prevailed upon Czechoslovakia. In return for Hitler's guarantee of world peace, Chamberlain and Delage prevailed upon Czechoslovakia to give up the Sudetenland without a fight. The happy Chamberlain came back declaring he had achieved peace in our time. One of the most tragic and ironic scenes in all history.
This morning, I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler. And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
Chamberlain believed that they could do a deal with Hitler, that Britain and Germany had a special affinity.
We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again.
Winston Churchill had warned his country and his government that they were pursuing a disastrous course with regard to appeasing Germany.
So, you know, that's one film clip about appeasement and the disaster of appeasement, that appeasement was so tragic because it aimed to try to promote peace and keep peace in Europe. But its fundamental assumptions we talked about last class was that Germany was belligerent and nasty because Germany's collectively was dominated by a worldview in the authorities that Germany was humiliated, that Germany was embarrassed, that Germany was not treated fairly, and that if you appease Germany, then Germany would become peaceful. And of course, that wasn't why Germany was belligerent. Germany was belligerent because it saw weakness and lack of will among the surrounding countries, with their weak governments, with their failures to address their economic problems, with the Great Depression, with their compared to Germany under Hitler, which they believed that Hitler and his rulers, his colleagues, believed they had solved Germany's problems. They were growing, they didn't have unemployment, their economy was growing at rapid rate, and now Germany had a marvelous opportunity to under Hitler win the war, win World War II. Even if they had to fight a war against France and Britain, they would destroy them, and they did. I mean, they defeated France in just basically a week at the beginning of the Second World War, what became the Second World War. And here's another clip that covers appeasement. And again, this is not just a history lesson. This is supposedly important for understanding how we're supposed to deal with China today, including the European Union.
But now Western Czechoslovakia was surrounded by the new Greater Germany. Here were the industrial...
Germany had united an Anschluss with Austria. So Austria was a German-speaking country, a German country that was united with Germany. So now with Greater Germany includes Austria and Germany surrounding the Sudetenland. Sudeten means southern lands. And so the Germans are concentrated here. The German minority in Czechoslovakia, in this country created at the end of World War I, the German minority is located here.
Houses of the Czech state, the factories and the mines. Here too were fortifications vital for Czech defense.
That we should be digging trenches and trying on gas masks here because of a quarrel in a faraway country between people whom we know nothing. War is a fearful thing. We must be very clear before we embark on it, that it is really the great issues that are at stake.
The Home Secretary made his appeal to the nation.
I appeal for men and women.
What's this? This is something else.
Appeasement leading to World War II.
Oh, it's somebody.
Appeasement is the policy of making concessions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so you see that statement from Chamberlain. Why would we go to the war to protect the Czechoslovakia? What is Czechoslovakia? He makes a reference to go to war for a people far away about whom we know little or know nothing. You could make the same points about America locating Korea on a map in 1950. Korea? Where's Korea? Why did Americans fight that war in Korea? Why are you here? Why am I here today in Korea right now? Because of those supposed lessons from Munich and appeasing Hitler's Germany. You do not appease an aggressive power. Because if you appease it, you just make it more aggressive. You make war more likely. So you have to contain it. And you have to contain it wherever that country attempts to expand to show that you are not degenerate. Remember the degenerate stereotype? So, and that again is the assumption that, oh, we did it right this time in dealing with the Soviet Union. So now we have this problem with China, right? And those supposed lessons from the case of the Cold War with the Soviet Union are now being rightly or wrongly slowly transferred to dealing with China, when of course the United States may also be argued to be an aggressive imperialist power, expanding its empire into Iraq, into Syria. It occupied Afghanistan and then withdrew. The way, you can make lots of comparisons about how the United States is acting like Britain in the 19th century, the United Kingdom in the 19th century when the British Empire was expanding. And they faced challenges from local actors like in Egypt that humiliated, embarrassed, and threatened British interests in Egypt. And so Egypt responded with a nationalist response and occupied Egypt at the end of the 19th century because of similar dynamics to how the Americans respond to problems in the Middle East. They end up occupying the country and expanding their empire even more. So you can make these comparisons between the United States and Great Britain in the 19th century. And of course, many people think, well, that's okay. I mean, Great Britain was a good actor in the 19th century. Great Britain provided general global peace in the 19th century. There was not a great power war between big, powerful countries since Napoleon until 1914, 100 years later. And that supposedly Britain played an important role. The United Kingdom and the British Empire played an important role in promoting world peace among the great powers. Of course, there were still wars between smaller countries or on the periphery between Britain and between Russian Empire and the Turkish Empire, and between Britain and the Russian Empire, in the Crimean War, for example, in other wars, but there was not a world war like there was basically under Napoleon in the early part of the 19th century, and then of course later at the beginning of the 20th century. And so some people say that was good. Britain did a good job in maintaining global peace. The United States should do the same. And of course, Britain finally failed to keep peace in 1914, and people often argue and fight about why. Why did World War I happen? And different scholars respond with different responses, different challenges. Some people say it was because Germany was growing rapidly, and Germany was economically growing much more rapidly than Britain, and that Britain wasn't as dominant in its prevailing perceptions in world affairs about Britain's economic power compared to rising Germany. Or they talk about the lack of flexibility and alliances, that Britain had made too many strong commitments to France and was not balancing correctly to keep Germany from feeling encircled. Italy was too small or too weak to counterbalance German and Austrian fears of being surrounded. So even though Italy had been an ally of Germany and Austria, it then shifted to becoming an ally with France and Britain, but that wasn't enough to convince the Germans to make peace. And so there were lots of arguments that continue in international relations theory to this present time. But the reason why we talk about this is because we're talking about the European Union today. And what is the proper role of the European Union in this world where the European Union claims to be a force for peace in the world? So like we asked last class, the European Union is trying to create a common foreign security policy with a common defense and security policy to support that, what is the challenge? What is the problem that the common defense and security policy of the European Union is supposed to face, is supposed to solve? What is the problem? Is the problem Beijing? Is the problem Moscow? Is the problem the United States? And how was Europe supposed to respond to promote peace in Europe and peace in the world? Remember, right? I mean, it was when Ukraine signed, when the Ukrainian nationalists overthrew the pro-Russian president with the support of Victoria Nuland of the United States administration, the United States politicians, the European Union politicians, overthrew a pro-Russian president of Ukraine because the pro-Russian president of Ukraine, who was democratically elected, refused to sign a free trade agreement with the European Union. When they overthrew, in response, Viktor Yanukovych, the pro-Russian president, that's when Putin in Moscow encouraged the secession of the pro-Russian elements within Ukraine and triggered a war that's killed thousands of people. Even though the European Union is supposed to be a force for peace in Europe and the world. And as we speak, the Russians have now mobilized 100,000 soldiers on the border of Ukraine. We don't know what they're planning to do, if they're trying to threaten or pressure, or maybe take more territory of Ukraine and add it to Russia, or basically, you know, probably write off the western part of Ukraine because that's the heartland of Ukrainian nationalism. But the eastern part of Ukraine, we said those borders were drawn in the 1920s by Lenin and Stalin. And but I mean, keep in mind, I mean, the European Union claims it's all about peace, 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 peace. But when Ukraine signed a free trade agreement with the European Union, that instigated a war. Now you might say, well, it's because Vladimir Putin wants to recreate the Russian Empire. And he's never accepted that Ukraine would leave the domination of Moscow. And when the European Union sought to prevent Russia from rebuilding its Soviet empire, when the European Union stopped Putin from his desires to rebuild the Soviet empire, that's how when Russia responded. So these are important questions, and they're not asked enough in the discussions of what the European Union's role in the world as an actor should be. And so that's the context when we talk about these notes. And so let me go back to the notes here. And so the transatlantic relationship, that means the relationship between the European Union and the United States. Is the United States the problem? I mean, the United States invaded Iraq when the European Union did not, I should say Paris and Berlin did not want the United States to invade Iraq in 2003. So this is the US, what is the US relationship with the European Union? And the authors state the relationship between the United States and the European Union is the most important relationship in the world. That's a pretty strong statement. This relationship has had difficulties. Before the Second World War, the US was wary of European powers. But then the Cold War forged a relationship of both common democratic values and mutual security needs. Again, just assuming that somehow the Soviet Union was a belligerent, aggressive power. I mean, so aggressive power. Of course, the Soviet Union might have been belligerent because it was afraid, but they will never admit that they're afraid, right? But then since the end of the Cold War, 30 years ago, a diverging set of goals and values has emerged as the differences between the European Union and the United States have become clear. Yeah, they become clear, but you know, they're not that strong. I mean, again, the biggest effort by the European Union to oppose the United States was when the United States invaded Iraq, prepared to invade Iraq 14 years ago. Well, 14 years ago? Oh, no, 15 years, 18 years ago in 2003. We're now in, 2021. So that's 18 years ago. The United States prepared to invade Iraq, and Paris and Berlin opposed that effort, and the Americans were able to get everybody else, but Paris and Berlin, to support everybody else in the European Union to support, and even including the countries that were going to join in 2004 and 2007. They all agreed to support the Americans despite the opposition of France and Germany. And as I mentioned, the European Union has never recovered from that. That they will not directly oppose the US on national security, terrorism questions. So, for example, we see it right now with regard to Iran. If the United States under a Republican administration is going to threaten war against Iran, I don't know if the Europeans are really going to oppose it. So usually the European Union and US agree on policy. The relationship between the two is close and productive. At times they have disagreed over issues such as the role of the United Nations, the intensity of the challenge of global climate change, and the International Criminal Court's role and powers. You don't even hear much about this anymore. This is, not really that important issue. And now that Biden has become president of the United States, there's not really much difference between the United States and the European Union on issues of global climate change. There was, of course, under Trump. Americans and Europeans differ fundamentally in their attitudes regarding moral issues like on abortion and the role of government and patriotism and national identity. Again, these issues became more prominent under Trump. But then when Biden became president, there was much less rhetorical disputes between the United States. There have been much less rhetorical disputes between the United States and the European Union. But again, we don't really know how long Biden will stay in office beyond the first term, if he will get reelected. And Trump continues to dominate the Republican Party in the United States. The European Union has many global connections besides its relationship with the United States. Russia is the European Union's biggest neighbor, and the economic stability and security of Russia are important issues. Russia and the European Union also do a great amount of international trade every year, unlike with the US and Russia. I mean, European Union buys most of its oil and gas from Russia, which is hundreds of billions of dollars a year of oil and gas that European Union buys from Russia, coming through Ukraine and Belarus. Much more business and trade, at least 10 times more business and trade than the United States does with Russia every year. And Russia is also a problem. Relations between the European Union and Russia have worsened over Ukraine. And also the European Union complains about Vladimir Putin's suppression of democracy in Russia. And the European Union is also unhappy about Russia's involvement in internal politics in the European Union through its hybrid social media interventions. And Russia has provided some money. Moscow has provided some money for political parties that they like because they disrupt the European Union. So they're, for example, Marine Le Pen's Rally for the Republic Party that's she's running for president of France again. There were words or reports a few years ago that her party had gotten some money or some loans from Russia because Russia seeks to increase nationalist hostility to European integration within the European Union. Russia and the European Union have disputes over Turkey. European Union and Turkey have problems regarding the undermining of democracy in Turkey, and Turkey has responded by improving its relations with Russia, basically as a way by which to leverage the United States and European Union, with the president of Turkey reminding Washington and Brussels that he has other options than cooperating with the European Union, even though European Union is by far the biggest trading partner with Turkey. And of course, also European Union needs Turkey's cooperation to manage migration flows into Europe, and the European Union has provided money to Turkey to fund the hosting of millions of refugees that have been fleeing Iraq and Syria and might well be coming from Afghanistan very soon. EU relations with Brazil, India, and China are also important, but China is also an emerging economic competitor, but is also an important trade partner. So the transatlantic relationship, we already mentioned about the importance of that relationship, and that the US and European Union are economic superpowers. However, again, I mean, I hate this term superpower. I'm not really certain what it means. I mean, the American superpower was defeated in Vietnam and it's now been defeated in Afghanistan. What does it mean to be a superpower? Okay, they're economic superpowers, but and obviously that's really very important for both of those states. But the willingness of the European Union to use its military, its power capabilities to restrain the United States, I mean, I'm not seeing much evidence of it. I mean, I'm not seeing much evidence. I mean, the European Union will somehow oppose the Americans when the Americans want changes in European Union policy, for example, regarding oil and gas pipelines, new oil and gas pipeline construction with Russia, but that's about it. The European Union is much less assertive than the United States, obviously, in world affairs. But they also are the leading economic and technological actors in the world. And so they tend to dominate and influence world culture as well as the world economy. So during the Cold War, I think it's fair to say that by the 1950s, particularly after Stalin died in 1953, the prevailing view in the what became the European Union was that Russia, Moscow was much less of a threat than was perceived in Washington. That the intensity of challenge from the communist Soviet Union was much less perceived as a serious danger in Europe than it was in the United States. However, the European Union leaders were always aware, that they need to cooperate with the United States because, as I mentioned earlier, there is this dominant view, not the only view, but the dominant view that European integration and expansion into Eastern Europe after communism collapsed is politically feasible because in the view of the people of Eastern Europe in particular, in Poland and in Bulgaria, European Union and NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, are two sides of the same coin, that they're not separable. And that means United States influence and European Union behavior are inseparable. And the Europeans know this. I mean, the willingness of Poland to cooperate so closely economically with German companies and the rest of the European Union in the German prevailing view is largely dependent upon the belief in Poland, in Warsaw, that the United States is dominant in Europe and that Germany is restrained or is monitored or is watched by Washington. If the United States separated from European affairs, if the United States closed all of its military bases in Europe and left, it's doubtful from the dominant view in Berlin today that they believe that European integration would be successful. And they know this. And they know that the Poles believe this. The Polish people, for example, believe this. And so you see, even though there has been disagreements between the European Union leadership and the American leadership, that the European leadership is not willing to challenge America to the point that America begins to seriously question its alliance with European states. And as I said, the last time the Europeans did that was in 2003, leading up to the invasion of Iraq. And it was very obvious how much the Polish people, the Bulgarian people, the Czech people, the other groups in Eastern Europe believe that if you want European integration, if you want to join the European Union, you have to be on excellent terms with the United States. So as I said, Paris and Berlin appealed to Poland and Hungary not to be so supportive of the United States, as the United States was looking for allies and friends to support its impending invasion of Iraq in March 2003. And nevertheless, Poland and other actors supported the American invasion. Poland even sent Polish military help occupy Iraq, and they paid no price for their disobedience, for their rejection of calls for restraint by Paris and Berlin. They paid no price for opposing Paris and Berlin's call not to support the United States. They paid no political price. They still all joined the European Union a year later in 2004 regarding the Baltic states, Poland, Czechoslovakia, or Czech and Slovak republics, and Hungary. They all still joined a year later, even though they opposed and rejected Paris and Berlin's calls not to support this American invasion of Iraq. And they rejected those Paris and French and particularly the French calls very brusquely, because, you know, the French president at the time, Jacques Chirac, a conservative, was very rhetorically disappointed and angry about how the East Europeans were too willing to follow the American lead and rejected Paris and Berlin's calls not to support the U.S. invasion. And the French president at the time made a statement about how sometimes it's just good just to be quiet, not to say anything. When the Americans ask you to do something, in this case, you could have just not responded. Poland and Hungary, you could have just not responded. And the Polish and Hungarian and other actors said, hey, Paris, hey, Berlin, don't tell us what to do. We were under the Soviet communist domination for the longest time, or we're not going to now follow what you in Paris and you in Berlin tell us to do. We will do what we think is best for us. And they supported the American occupation of Iraq. They sent different degrees of support. I mean, as I mentioned, a Polish general was actually in charge of one sector of Iraq occupying that country. And the Czech Republic sent some troops, and the Bulgarians sent some troops, and the Romanians sent, mostly just symbolic representations of their support, not major deployments, but very. I mean, but they were there, and they suffered some casualties when they were attacked by bombers, by resistance groups within Iraq. But they paid no price for disobeying, for rejecting Paris and Berlin's calls. They all still joined the European Union in the next several years. And so the book goes on and highlights how after World War II, Europe recovered and there was more differences with the US. But even when the European Union was opposed, or the European leadership was skeptical of US policies like in Vietnam, they limited their criticism to rhetoric. They never really challenged the Americans in their international strategy. US supported Europe's economic reconstruction after the war. It did so through the Marshall Plan, also called the European Recovery Program. And the US contributed to European integration intentionally through the Marshall Plan. The Americans encouraged the Europeans to cooperate together so that there would be less economic nationalism and more economic cooperation, so that there would be more efficiency and more economic results by not wasting economic resources through wasteful economic nationalist resistance to cooperation. So the Americans supported the Organization for European Economic Cooperation, which then became the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. And later the OECD would become, this organization would become the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And as I mentioned in the US foreign policy class, it was in the 1990s when South Korea joined the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which was a big nationalist source of pride for South Korea, because it was an indicator to South Koreans in 1997 that they were officially a developed country because they joined the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. But it began as the Organization for European Economic Cooperation in support of the Marshall Plan. And NATO provided security, so Western European states could focus on rebuilding their economies rather than spending money on big militaries. And the United States supported European integration within the context of the Cold War, that the Americans believed But the Soviet Union, particularly under Stalin, was a Russian version of Nazi Germany, and America had to help Japan and Western Europe recover and rebuild from the war, not just because the Americans wanted to sell products in those countries, but also because America needed stable, strong allies to contain the Soviet Union. And you know, the Europeans became doubtful about the Americans' perceived Soviet threat. As I mentioned, pretty much by the time Stalin died, the Europeans doubted that the Soviet Union was threatening to invade or wanted to invade Western Europe. But that was still the dominant threat view in the United States. And all the way up to my high school period in the late 1970s, I remember reading American newspapers, you know, questioning whether or not the Soviet Union might invade Western Europe, that the Soviet army stationed in Eastern Germany and in other countries in Eastern Europe would use Eastern Europe as a jumping board, as a springboard to launch an attack into Western Europe. But the Europeans, the West Europeans, did not share that intense view, but they knew it was dominant in America. And they knew if they needed to appeal and get support from the United States, they needed to talk in terms that the Americans understood. So the Europeans would be willing to support American initiatives, for example, to rebuild American nuclear forces in Western Europe in the early 1980s when Ronald Reagan became president. He wanted America to install new intermediate range ballistic missiles, Pershing II missiles they were called, in response to the Soviet deployment of SS-24 Soviet missiles. And the Europeans acquiesced to those demands, partly because they needed American support. But there were massive demonstrations, huge demonstrations in Germany and Italy and London against the American missile deployment of the Pershing II missiles. Hundreds of thousands of people in these demonstrations 40 years ago, almost 40 years ago in Germany, West Germany, and Italy. And it was in this context that the Green Party emerged in Germany. In these anti-nuclear protests opposed to the Reagan administration's demand that the West Europeans accept the new Pershing II missile deployments, the intermediate range ballistic missile Pershing II missiles from the United States, led to these demonstrations that led to the emergence of the Green Party. And the Green Party is now one of the leading parties in Germany. And I think it's, going to be in the new German government that's coming into power under Olaf Scholz, replacing Angela Merkel. So the Green Party got its start in that mass public youth-led resistance protests against Ronald Reagan's reinvigoration of the Cold War and the installation of new nuclear forces to support that reinvigorated containment of the Soviet Union. And I already mentioned the 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq. Of course, the Europeans, they're criticized when they appear to stop bad things fail to stop bad things from happening. So for example, Olson mentions that the Europeans looked really weak in dealing with the disintegration of Yugoslavia in the early 1990s, which, people had been predicting, many observers had been predicting that after Tito died in 1980, that Yugoslavia would begin to fall apart and would probably be violent. And of course, we won't go into it here, but there's a lot of evidence that also there were forces in the United States that really did not support the Europeans in their efforts to lead the international community's response to the political changes in Yugoslavia. I mean, there was the Vance-Owen plan, for example, led by Cyrus Vance, Jimmy Carter's former Secretary of State. Cyrus Vance was representing the United Nations, and Lord David Owen of Britain was representing the European Union. And they attempted to come up with a peace settlement in the former Yugoslavia. But when you look at what the Americans, how the American government under Bill Clinton, under the Clinton administration, under Bill Clinton, they did not enthusiastically support the Vance-Owen efforts. The Americans under Clinton had determined that they were going to blame Serbia and Milosevic government in Belgrade in Serbia as being the primary guilty party for the violent disintegration of Yugoslavia. The Serbs are going to blame. They were going to blame the Serbs. So any accommodation of the Serbs was rewarding Serbian aggression, appeasing Serbia, and that would be a bad thing. That was a stronger view held in the Clinton administration in Washington than in European Union. The European Union was less focused on blaming anybody for the hostility and escalating fear and suspicion and conflict that led to civil war in Yugoslavia. And why? There are different reasons, different speculations for that. Part of it being perhaps that the Clinton administration wanted to show that NATO, and that means the United States, should play a leading role in Yugoslavia. NATO, not European Union, NATO. And that means US, United States. And Serbia traditionally had a close relationship with Russia, going back many generations. So there was an element of this suspicion that Serbia was a traditionally pro-Moscow actor. But Olson doesn't talk about that in the book. And the way he talks about the European Union supposed weakness in dealing with the Balkans, that's the standard view, that European Union failed in the Balkans. What they don't tell you typically is that the Americans contributed to that failure. Now, what I said is controversial because other people argue that the peaceful breakup of Yugoslavia was impossible. The violence was already beginning when Clinton became president in January 1993. The war was already starting. The war was already underway, and it was too late at that point to stop the violent escalation in Yugoslavia. It was too late when Bill Clinton was inaugurated US president in January 1993. It was too late by then. So you can't really blame the United States for undermining the Van Zoen plan, because the Van Zoen plan wasn't going to work anyway. And that's the typical response. So, but just be aware. And then this 2003 Iraq crisis, that was a critical moment, European Union, EU relationship. I think I messed that up, EU-US relationship. Several European governments for the first time openly opposed the United States. Since 1945, they openly opposed the US, particularly France and Germany, in terms of preparing for the invasion of Iraq. And Donald Rumsfeld, who was Secretary of State at the time, he talked about France and Germany as being old Europe, that France and Germany, because they were old developed states with the highly advanced social democracy, with expensive welfare state programs, that they'd taken for granted the freedom and prosperity that the Americans had provided, that they're old and sclerotic and degenerate, whereas Eastern European countries like Poland and the former communist countries that enthusiastically agreed to support the United States in dealing with Saddam Hussein, that is new Europe, vigorous, young democracies that know that you must fight for freedom. You cannot take freedom for granted, and they're willing to pay the price. Again, talking in terms of opportunity, that Europe, Western Europe, is degenerate. Old Europe, old Europe. But communist countries, the former communist countries, the new democracies in Eastern Europe, they were supporting the United States, and they are new, vigorous, strong, vibrant Europe. And this was the most serious crisis in transatlantic relations since 1945. And as I said, the Europeans, of course, after that experience, have attempted to support the United States. NATO and the European Union, for example, even the Germans sent military delegations to Iraq to train the new Iraqi army. They have not really ever attempted to oppose the United States strongly again, certainly in the Middle East. And now they have another test: what to do about Afghanistan, what to do about Iran. I mean, Afghanistan is a disaster. I mean, people are going to starve by the hundreds of thousands. They're going to die unless the world removes the sanctions on the Taliban regime, does business and trade with them. And rather than die, those people, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, are going to try to get into the European Union. So what is the European Union going to do regarding Afghanistan and Iran? Okay, so we're running out of time here. And so just to give you some participation credit, let me ask you to do a quick exercise, a vote on this topic. So please respond to this question that and make sure that you can see that, share screen, that the European Union still represents American hegemony in Europe. So please vote. Do you think the European Union represents the civilian soft power side of NATO, of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? That European Union basically is another sophisticated version of NATO. So please vote. And okay, so that's it for today. I've got to leave because I have to go do some other things now. And I'm going to close the class. And yeah.
And then is there no class on Friday, December 3rd?
No, there is class on Friday, December 3rd. It's the following Friday, December 10, that we will not be meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye.